Welcome to the Susan Brender Show. It's all about you. Featuring shows on health and wellness, the performing arts, politics, and people who inspire you to be your very best. And now, here's Susan Brender.
I'm Susan Brender, and this is the Susan Brender Show. Today I have the great honor of having a guest on my show by the name of Hugh Davies. Now, Hugh is a vintner, and he's the president of Schramsberg Vineyards and Davies Vineyards. Now, he's one of the first people that we've ever done a show with on the whole subject of wine and winemaking. So one might say that Hugh Davies was born with a wineglass in his hand, and that he wouldn't be too far from the truth, because Hugh was born in 1965, the same year that his parents, Jack and Jamie Davies, purchased the abandoned Schramsberg Estate in Calistoga, California. Now, you grew up amongst the vines, caves, tanks, and barrels that make Schramsberg Vineyards what it is today. I want to welcome to my show Hugh Davies.
Well, thank you very much, Susan. Great to be with you.
Well, you know, Hugh, it's not everybody who I interview who has the great pleasure and probably the honor of making great champagnes and wines. Now, most people, you know, they just go to the supermarket, or they go to a wine store or places of that nature, and they just pick out a wine. They don't know what it tastes like. They just say to themselves, well, I've heard the name, so maybe it's good. Now, in your case, tell the audience, why are your wines so far superior to the other wines that are on the shelves?
You're very nice to suggest that might be the case, and we're of course always honored that someone might think that our wines are delicious. We work hard to make them, that's for darn sure. In our case, we started 51 years ago in 1965. My parents would revive this old property here in the hills above Calistoga with the idea of making, in their words, world-class sparkling wine. And so they really wanted to take the notion to a new level in California and here in the States, or the New World. At that moment, no one was really using Chardonnay and Pinot Noir to make bottle-fermented sparkling wine like is done in the Champagne district of France. So that was new. And we have worked with that kind of mission statement or that vision ever since. All kinds of different turns and twists along the way that have enabled us to stay in that pocket and with that focus in mind.
You know, Hugh, when people think of wines, they always think of Europe, okay? French wines, they think they're superior. And they realize that also places like in Argentina now, in Chile, and places of that nature, that they're producing excellent wines. But they don't necessarily think of the U.S. as being a place where superior wines are produced. Now, set them straight. Tell them all about how the wines that you and the people in Napa and Sonoma do as much as they do in France and all the other places I mentioned.
Yeah, no, I would say that, you know, kind of, I guess it depends on your vantage point, where you might actually be stationed or where you might live. The good news for those of us making arguably very fine wines in California is that there is a market, and a growing market, for our wines. It is principally a domestic market, and, you know, so while we do export some of our wines, I think California might be exporting in the neighborhood of 15% of its volume. 85% would be consumed domestically. With that, you know, we're probably a little bit more popular in California, which is a big state, and you know, in the West. But you know, many of us do quite well in New York and in Chicago and in Florida and you know, Texas. So we have evolved and developed good distribution and good popularity over the course of time. If you do go back 50 years, okay, at that point there wasn't much wine, certainly of a quality standpoint, made in California. And part of the challenge there is that we had a period of prohibition in this country. So while that may sound like that's ancient history, 1918 to 1933, it was illegal to commercially produce wine in the United States. And so there was an industry, a burgeoning industry before that time, and then there was a period of serious inactivity. And so it's taken a while for the industry to come back online, and as it has, it's done extraordinarily well. And in '76, there was kind of a seminal moment when, with the Paris tasting and the California wines, were favored in this tasting against some of the best of France, which was an exciting moment. But there's been a serious growth in our industry since that time, and there have been other key moments in the line. So we're doing pretty darn well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Now, this is what I think our audience would like to hear. They'd like to know exactly how are the wines made. So give us the process of making wines, because when I think, sometimes you look at movies and they show people in this vat and they're stamping on wines. Now, we know that they don't do that anymore because it would be almost impossible to produce a lot of wines, and as you said, they're very popular. So give us the kind of process that wines go through.
It depends. There are various types of wines, right? So your question is fairly open-ended. Mm-hmm. You've got red wines that are fermented in contact with skins. You've got white wines that aren't. You have sparkling wines, which is principally what we've focused on all these years, where we effectively make white wines that are fermented apart from the skins, and then we add a little bit of yeast and sugar to the blended base wine that we've crafted, and then go through a bottle fermentation that happens inside bottles in a cave, and then there's subsequent aging. That process culminates in the riddling, the turning of the bottles that get the yeast down into the neck, so that we can freeze the neck, extract the yeast, add a finishing touch we call the dosage. Then the cork and the wire goes in. Typically, the sparkling wines that we're making might be 3, 4, up to 8, 9, 10 years old at the moment that they're released. With red wines, depending on the price point, there's a process of contact with skins. So you ferment the juice in contact with skins in vats. They can be stainless steel. They can be concrete. There are moments where we need to continue to immerse the cap or the skins and punch that material down, so that we're constantly soaking the skins in contact with the juice to extract nice color and flavor and density. Much of this is kind of a combination today in terms of automation and hand work. In the larger production wines, that would typically be less expensive, as you would figure. Probably less automation. But in the higher end products, wherever they might be made in the world, there's going to be more hand labor involved.
Right.
So hopefully that kind of paints a picture. But
sure
there really is a broad range of wines made, and many different techniques that can be employed to produce them.
Now let's talk a little bit about the health. The quality of the wine and how it helps, say in the case of red wines. Does it really have an influence on keeping the body healthy?
There's definitely scientific evidence at this point that points to the benefit of some of the compounds that are found in wine grapes and grapes, and then ultimately in the wines. The notion of these anthocyanins, which are color compounds that have been tied to healthy heart, and so there was a study that was documented in a 60 Minutes episode going back to 1993 that talked about the French paradox and the notion of these chemical compounds, which are phenolic compounds found in the skins primarily, that impart benefit in terms of heart health, and so that's there. I think there's some evidence that a certain amount of alcohol in the body is healthy, but everything in moderation, obviously. I mean, almost anything can be overdone, and so it's not to say, hey, you're allowed to have a limitless amount of wine in your daily diet. I would say that's probably overstated.
Right.
2-3 glasses of wine a day. That was kind of what this French paradox was about, where they've been doing this in France for all these years, and from a heart standpoint, there's evidence that would suggest that that's a good thing.
Yeah. Now, you run something called the Camp Schramsberg program.
Mm-hmm.
You started it in 1998, so you're going to be celebrating next year the 20th year of the program. Now, why did you start it, and what's the focus of the program?
Yeah, Camp Schramsberg is what I often consider to be our very best visit. People love to visit wineries, right? There's an opportunity to, step into a different world, and much as we were sitting here talking, we're exploring the world of wine, and then more specifically, the world of the Schramsberg Winery, and how we think and how we do the things that we do. People might visit the winery and do an hour and 15-minute tour and tasting, and they'll get a glimpse. Camp Schramsberg is more like the 48-hour visit, right? It's a Sunday night, Monday night, Tuesday, and so we go basically from about 5 o'clock on a Sunday afternoon all the way till about 5 o'clock on a Tuesday afternoon.
Wow.
And we're in the vineyards, we're in the winery, we're exploring aspects of our process during the specific time of year that we might be together. We just completed our harvest camp, if you will, and so this time of year, September, we're picking grapes, we're fermenting the juice, we're making very young wines. But we do some disgorging activities. I talked a little earlier about how we riddle the bottles and then get the yeast out of the bottle and add the finishing touch dosage. So we do a whole series of tastings to really explore over a couple of days how we in fact make these wines. Beyond that, we partner with Möet, which is a resort hotel here in St. Helena in Napa Valley that has a 3 Michelin star restaurant, really one of the finest restaurants in the country. Lucky for us, it's right here, and so we explore at a really high level of quality how we might pair these sparkling wines with a range of foods, and so it's a very exciting and very unique glimpse into our world, and we limit it to 30 people per camp, if you will, per session. We do one in September around the harvest, and one in March around the blending time period, which is a whole different focus, if you will, and so some folks have actually done both camps.
Wow. Now, people think of sparkling wines as a kind of simple thing that, well, let's not call it simple. They think of these sparkling wines as wines that you just have during holidays, during festivals, during celebrations of all kinds of things. Now, isn't it true that sparkling wines actually are great wines to have with any meal?
I love your statement. We are big believers. We'll often have a glass, kind of before dinner, as we're making dinner. We might have a little sparkling wine with the meal, depending on what it is. Heartier, richer fare, might pair a little bit more effectively with a richer red wine. But I find that sparkling wines really fit any moment you might be drinking a white wine. boom, you could have a sparkling wine.
Right.
And that said, there's a whole range of sparkling wines. What we produce typically would be priced somewhere from $25 a bottle at a low end, all the way up to $150 a bottle at the high end. Okay, well, as you get up to the high end, not all of us are going to be springing above $50 a bottle for the wine that we're going to have with dinner.
Right.
But as you get under that price point, that you're in a zone where many of us might. In fact, that's not so far out of reach, and there's a great depth of flavor and style in sparkling wine. Very vibrant acidity, very palate cleansing, and we certainly find that they can go beautifully with a wide range of food.
What's the content of sugar in the sparkling wine as compared to a red wine or a white wine? Is there more?
In the finished sparkling wine, brut sparkling wines, you're generally going to be around 1%. In the making of still wines, that would be less, probably, often, maybe a 0.25%, 0.5%, slightly higher. There's some still wines that frankly might be 1% as well, but generally all of those, all of that range, if you will, is dry. The one thing about brut sparkling wines, and particularly, really fine brut sparkling wines, whether they're from some of the producers here in California or France, wherever, is that the acidity that balances with the sugar is very high, or I should say is relatively high. And so we have this really nice kind of tartness and this balance of just a touch of sweetness with that I think people find really, really attractive. When you think of the juice that we start out with, when we pick the grapes, if you buy some grapes at the store and bite into them, you're probably looking at things that are more than 20% sugar.
Right.
So while there's some sweetness there, by the time you're down to 1%, that's not very sweet at all.
Right.
And that said, there may be some styles of sparkling wine where you could be higher than that, getting up to 3%, 4%, 5%, but that's typically where they would top out, and those would be referred to more in the demi-sec category, semi-dry, and not quite as popular. We do make one demi-sec style as well that we find works really well with fruit-based pastries, sometimes, an interesting cheese platter, that type of thing.
Right. Now, it sounds like you're so passionate about what you do. I'm listening to you, and, our show is called Visa Vitality, and it sounds like you've got that vitality that you need to grow great wines. I'm sure it's a science, too. So from your standpoint, to be a vintner like yourself, you need kind of a background in science and a background in and I don't know if I should call this a background of vitality and passion, but you seem to have it. Now, where did that come from?
Well, in my case, somewhat unique for a kid in the United States. As you indicated, you don't think of, some of us anyway, don't think of the United States as kind of a wine culture. But definitely in pockets of California, Oregon, Washington, and other pockets around the country, there are communities where the principal industry is wine. And so I happen to have grown up here in the Napa Valley, California. My parents were making wine before I was born. Most of my friends worked in wineries at one stage or another. Their parents did, and so it is. I'm from a community that's part of the United States where that's what we do. Mm-hmm. And I did go to eventually UC Davis, University of California Davis, where they have really a great
Well, I'm going to bring up something that is really different. We have a presidential election coming up. Now, the people that you hire to do the grapes, to take all the grapes, to manage to put them in all the places that they need to be in order to make good wines. Most of them, I imagine, are from different countries, right? Like Mexico.
Yeah, I mean, in this part of California and much of the agricultural part of California, you have really generations now of Mexican immigrants who have made a tremendous contribution to our I would say our well-being, right? To our industry and to our community, and I think we feel I feel a real bond to these folks, the families. There are many people that have worked with us of Mexican descent who have been employees at this winery 30, 40 plus years. We honor those guys and women. I've shared my life with many Mexican American people and feel a great affinity for them. In California in general, the Mexican American population is quite significant, and certainly even more so in a place like Napa Valley.
Well, let me interrupt you for a second. So I don't care who you vote for, and it's not my business to ask you that. But on the other hand, the way you described your relationship with the Mexican Americans and immigrants who you've worked with for many years, it sounds like you must have some sort of opinion about what you hear when they want to build a wall between Mexico and between California. Am I asking you something that's too private, or do you have any kind of comment that you'd like to make about that?
I didn't envision the conversation moving in a political direction, but I suppose I'm a little bit dubious about whether that would be something that we would need.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so we get the picture right here. So now let's just go on to you as the second generation vintner. Now, are you already looking toward the future and how a third generation might take over your vineyard one day? Is it your kids that you want to do that?
You got your fingers crossed, and all. In all candor, this is something that our family's really been engaged with now into a second generation. Sparing some of the details, there's been a good amount of planning that really preceded, to some degree, my adult life that would enable us to transition from one generation to the next. In terms of estate planning and that type of thing, it is for me. It's an exciting and unique life that we've been able to live in a great community that we've been able to be part of. And as we were just talking, the multicultural aspect of it is kind of cool too.
Yeah.
I speak Spanish. That in the end kind of came naturally. But I would I would highly recommend it to my kids, but my oldest is 11, so.
So you got a long time to go.
Yeah,
I understand that. Yeah,
but he actually was working this summer.
Really?
A little bit on the payroll. Kind of 2-hour stints. He's now in 6th grade, and I've got a 5th grader who next summer is kind of excited to join his brother, and so. I also have a niece and a couple of nephews that are a bit older who have worked at the winery during the summers. So we'll see. I would imagine there will be members of the next generation that will want to play a role. Probably not all, but that's something we look forward to.
The one question that I should have asked from the beginning, but I can't help it. I have to ask it now. Is what happens when you have a situation where the weather affects your grapes? California is a place where there are earthquakes, where the weather is, can be very dry. As a matter of fact, when I visited Schramsberg's, I noticed that all around Napa and Sonoma, it looks so dry. Now, does that affect your wines? And if the answer is yes, what do you do about it?
The parts of California are drier than other parts of California. One thing that's really unique about this kind of coastal part of California, and here, I guess I'll even more specifically speak about the North Coast. So if you think of the North Coast of California, if you can picture the state of California north of San Francisco, you're as you follow up the coastline, you're in the North Coast. And you have Marin County, Sonoma County, Napa County, Mendocino County. We do tend to get a fair amount of rain, which may be surprising to hear. Although we get that rain in the winter months, so our rain falls somewhat quite heavily between December and March. Don't forget. We're really in the redwood country, and the redwoods, continue up the coast. Giant trees, the tallest trees on the planet, right?
Sure.
And they grow because we get a combination of precipitation, but also sun. And so our proximity to the Pacific Ocean, here, and again, these we're talking about, coastal valleys and pockets, all within, an hour's drive of the ocean, do pick up a fair amount of rain at that specific moment in time. There's quite a bit of water under the ground that sustains, kind of the agricultural industry that we have here. And it's a little different than some of the other parts of the state where it may be more parched. So an average rainfall in a town like St. Helena or Calistoga would be 30 to 35 inches a year. As you get to Los Angeles, I think is more like 12 or 15.
Yeah, right.
That's different. And if you go inland from Los Angeles, you really start to get into a much more desert-like environment. California's got a lot of diversity in that sense. In August, September, that's about the driest time of year that we have around this North Coast. Depending on when you were here, you might have experienced that and some heat that comes in every afternoon. That's good for the wine grapes because the rest of the day, most of the day is a lot cooler than that. And at night, we're all asleep, so we don't really think about it. But what happens is that the ocean air will infiltrate into these coastal valleys and cool everything down again. And so we have this ability to fairly gently ripen our fruit with these nice warm pockets of in each day towards the afternoon, sometimes even getting a little bit hot. And then and there's a notion of dryness there, but then as the sun sets, it starts to cool down, and honestly, you'll see somewhat regularly shifts, what we call diurnal shifts, of 30 to 40 degrees Fahrenheit. And so, it could be 100 degrees at a peak, which is a pretty hot day, but we'll definitely get some of those, and then boom, at the coldest time of day, it'll be back to 60 degrees. And so, it's almost like imagining an oven that kind of warms up and then cools back down. So if it stayed 100 degrees all day long, well, yeah, I mean, you'd start to cook a little bit.
Right.
And so on the notion of dryness during the summer, it really also works wonders from the standpoint of growing grapes, because it does reduce the amount of pressure that we have from mold and mildew and other pests, I'll call them, that may make it a little more difficult to grow really delicious fruit. So the Pacific Ocean does wonders for those of us who are growing really premium wine grapes here in this region.
I hear you. Now, I always like to give my guests the last word. I'm sure you have something to tell our audience, and if you want to tell them a little bit about how they get some wines from Schramsberg and how they order, what your procedure is, that would be great. So let's hear it.
Well, you can certainly visit our website. And so Schramsberg.com, so that would be spelled SCHRAMSBERG.com. And there you'll learn a little bit more about us and the range of wines that we make. We talked about the sparkling wines a little bit more than the still wines that we're producing at this stage as well under the Davies label. So our name is Davies. The original founders of this winery property were the Schrams, so that name Schramsberg, Schrams Mountain goes way back to the 1800s and a whole different era. But we're making some beautiful red wines as well. Cabernet Sauvignon, specifically from this hillside property where the historic winery is. Pinot Noir from vineyards a little further afield, out towards the coast in Sonoma, down in the Carnos region at the south end of Napa, and further to the north of us up in the Anderson Valley of Mendocino County. But no, I sure appreciate your interest and enthusiasm for what it is that we're doing, and a big believer in California wines, and even more specifically in the wines that we're producing. I would think people would find them delicious and fairly priced.
Oh, when I listen to you and I think about what it was like to be in Napa and Sonoma and take a look at some of the vineyards, especially yours, I just say to myself, wow, what a lucky guy that his family got involved with wines, and he's now taking over and producing very fine wines. So I want to thank you, for being a guest on the Susan Brender Show, because you just know so much, and you told our audience a lot about how wines are made. I think that's very educational and informational, and that's what our audience loves. So I want to thank you for being on the Susan Brender Show. It's been a great pleasure for me.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much, Susan, and all the best to you and your listeners.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for listening to the Susan Brender Show. To be a guest, email sebrender@yahoo.com.